the council, Mike Casey, the manager, his amazing staff, Corinna and Victoria, who has been of inestimable help to the Heritage Committee for years, who has a broken ankle. And the committee, the Heritage Committee, we try to have a program every year for the community. And a lot of the new people, it's hard to, these days, let people get the word out. Because it used to be we had the paper, everybody got it and read it, it was worth reading, and they would, publish things. So
Jennifer, have them stand up so everybody can see them in case they want to share anything with us, the Heritage Committee members.
yeah, please stand. Heritage Committee, Linda Glass, Annette Joyner, Dory Frederickson, Carol Andren, Dreama Moody was here.
This is the Historical Society?
Yeah, and
Is that what it is?
Heritage.
Oh, Heritage Committee. Heritage Committee.
Share the panel, and you all are invited to chime in with your memories, questions, whatever. So we're meant to just have a good time, and we'll just get going.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. We're so pleased to share some tidbits of what Indialantic has been like over the years. To a lot of the new people, it's hard to believe, but all of these boards that the girls put together are pictures of what Indialantic's history is all about. We were really incorporated in 1952, but there was much going on from the turn of the century on. In fact, some of the most historic buildings were built in the 20s and earlier than incorporation began. Ernest Cowan, Deanne would tell me, Cowan-Hoven, who was really our founder and developed much of Indialantic. Her daughters used to come and share, and we just loved hearing the stories they had to tell. In 1920, the Indialantic Hotel, which is what it was named at the time, was built, and then it was it was changed to the Trade Winds Hotel, and it's in the footprint of the Trade Winds. What do you call it? Yes, right. And in the very back of it, there used to be a exit onto 11th Avenue, and 11th Avenue was called the Beach Street. Because that's where everyone walked down to the beach. In 24, the Indialantic Casino was built in the footprint of Nance Park, and it was later called the Bahama Beach Club. And it had a saltwater pool there, and the kids could go and swim in that pool. The population in 1960, when the first census was made after Indialantic became a city, or town, not a city, was 1,653 people. And today we have just about 3,500 plus residents. It's 1.31 square miles. It's a very small town. Our zip code goes all the way to O'Galley Boulevard, but our zip code ends right around Watson, I think.
Miami to Watson.
Yeah, Miami to Watson. So we're pretty small. So today I would take up the whole entire time if I tried to present the speakers today with their accolades and their history and all of that. So we're in a very casual environment, so I'm just going to introduce them. The first one to my left is Judge Bruce Jacobus, who was on the 5th District Court of Appeals from here in Brevard County, and he sat in Daytona Beach, or Daytona. Next to him is his son, Kurt Jacobus, who's we've discovered is our own real sitting judge right now. He's a circuit court judge in Brevard County. Next to him is Judge George Maxwell, who is a retired circuit court judge. And next to him is somebody I know pretty good, Jim Earp, my husband, who is was a circuit court judge. He retired and became a senior judge, so he still occasionally goes in and plays judge, I say.
So do I.
I don't think he likes that, but that's okay.
So does George. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I usually do is I go through and I might ask a question of each guest, and then they really have a chance to tell what they would like for us to hear about growing up during those times. Like Bruce said, if you grew up in the 60s and 70s and still remember it, you really didn't grow up in the 60s and 70s, right? No, I'm just kidding. One thing I want to ask of Bruce is, there's a Jacobus burrito at the local Island Burrito. Is that named after you? Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes.
I just had to know that. I figured it was your dad, because
It's very expensive and gives you gas, really.
well, the only time I ever saw Bruce outside of the courtroom was at a place where he was eating, so I just figured it was his.
That's true.
Okay.
Those days are over, though.
Well, I did hear a little something about you this morning, that there was a little problem with trying to take one of your mother's checks and get it cashed, and they even called the police on you?
Silent alarm.
They arrested him.
And you were how old?
4 or 5.
I heard it was 10, but we'll take 4 or 5.
No, that was
They went to the
14.
bank. They went to the bank.
No, I was probably 5 or 6.
Okay.
And right across the street here. Landmark, I think, wasn't it? Was it Landmark at the time?
What?
It was Landmark.
Yeah. Landmark, and it became Bank of America.
Bank of America.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
And to you, George, I know you're going to tell us a little bit about your days
No.
with the surf guide, Murph the Surf. I don't know how many people have heard who he is. Have you ever heard the name Murph the Surf?
Jack Murphy?
Well, you're going to hear a little bit about that today, because that really is an interesting part of our history. We've had some characters, some in-laws and outlaws here, and I'm hoping that you will share some of that today. And Jim, I hope that you will share your stories about the beachfront. You spent most of your time, you know, he has a twin brother who he calls the brainiac of the two, and he would come home and go right into his room and do his homework, and Jim would put his shorts on and go right to the beach. But the beach was a much different place, and as Dick Catree said, that is, the beachfront here in Indialantic is really our legacy here in Indialantic. We don't have soccer fields or big buildings or, you know, things like that, but we have that beachfront, and that was what kept all the kids out of trouble back in those days, and about what the beach looked like, and, you know, that sometimes you would ride your motorcycle down the beach. So, you know, I'm just trying to get you guys thinking about what you want to talk about. So I'm going to open up with Bruce and let him give us a little walk through your life of living in Indiana. Tell me what brought you here.
Cold weather. I was born in Vermont, and my mother went out, it was like 40 below, her eyes froze shut, and she said, Dale P. Jacobus, Dale, we're going to Florida. So we came in 1946. So, and my dad was in the contracting business and air conditioning and engineering. So he built a lot of the houses down Riverside, you know, the Bahama Beach Club. We put the air conditioning in that. I can still remember, I think I was probably 10, being in there at night, you know, working air conditioner with my dad, starving to death, and they would go by, you know, with those steaks on the platters. But then it became the Bikini Beach Club at one point. But we would swim there and stuff in the summertime. So the 60s, really, I went to college, so I wasn't really here much. And then, you know, the late 60s, I went to Europe for a while, and then came back and went to law school. So kind of, I had a gap there. But the one thing I told Cindy was interesting. You know, there was no road between Watson and O'Galley Boulevard north. The only road in was from Pine Tree that went to the guy's house that owned all the property. His name was Sidney Bosky. I think he actually owned the beach club at one time. But so it was like 1962, we built the road. In the summertime, where's Richard? Are you still here? Did Richard leave? Done? Anyway, there was about 20 or so kids that in the summertime we worked for Joe Wickham in the road and bridge. So we were building roads, and we did Wickham Park. We built roads in everybody's districts, but we built the road between Watson and O'Galley Boulevard. And it was my father was best friends with Uncle Joe. I call him Uncle Joe. But so my dad had the great idea of building the road on the east right of way, because it's a 100-foot right of way. It's made to be a 4-lane road. You know, his idea was someday in the future to make it 4 lanes. Well, when they wanted to do it, you know how that worked. All the people on the river thought they owned the right of way. So.
Well, that's a good question I have. Why are the roads east and west so much narrower than the roads that go north and south?
You mean in Indialantic?
And yeah.
Because those were Michigan and up in that way? 'Cause those-
All of them, really.
Well, some of them are wider, but, really the ones on the north side, I think, are the most narrow, but that's just the way they built them, when they develop it. The actual development of Indian Atlantic was Rudy Obsoff and Lloyd Ecclestone Sr. Lloyd Jr. did down there in Vero Beach, yeah, or but he did that, but Ecclestone Sr. was the developer of all this stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And Ernest Cohenhaven, he was the original developer kind of guy. Got the big bridge built. I think he had the old hotel where the Florida Air Academy was. That was his. But that's kind of. I remember Fifth Avenue, all houses, residential houses when I was a kid. There was nothing here commercial except the hotel and the beach club, and there were some stores that were kind of connected to the beach club, but that was it, really. It was all a residential community. On the backside of the trade winds was a golf course. They had a golf course, so a lot of those houses are built where the golf course was.
And the tea room is still there. The tea room's on Shannon and 12th.
Yeah.
It's a residence
Yeah.
now,
The
but
funny thing is, in those days in the 50s and 60s, no one wanted to live on the ocean. They all wanted to live on the riverside.
Oh.
Yeah. And my dad built some houses on the ocean side, but the one of them is the one that, the glass house and all that. If you know where that house is, it was Bill Kerr Sr.'s house. That they built that in 1952, and it was yeah.
Yale University has a whole monograph on it.
Yeah.
oh, no kidding.
Rudolph and Twitzer were the architects. They were post and beam builders, and it was all glass. But I mean, that house was built in 1952. So.
That's
All
great.
right.
All right. Well, Kurt, why don't you tell us? I guess I know when you
Born
came.
till 76.
Oh, okay. Well, that's when you came to Indian Atlantic. I figured
came
you
in
could just go ditto.
76, so it's my parents. I'm trying to remember from 0 to 3. I mean, I can't. It's kind of hard to remember that.
Were you a surfer?
Nope.
Fisherman.
Fishing and skiing.
Yeah.
I mean, boating, the old Grand Canal. Ski Canal. But here, I mean, I just remember, riding a bike around here. I remember the old Tradewinds Hotel. I mean, it was a small town. I mean, I went to Jim and I didn't go to Indian Atlantic. We lived on DeLand, but I'd ride my bike at kindergarten from there to Jim and I and back. Yeah. But nowadays, parents would get arrested for it.
I know. That's true.
It's true.
Yeah, but I mean, but it was, it was family friendly. We'd a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, and we'd all just, be friends and ride our bikes around.
Yeah, Jim said they'd find the least supervised house and go there.
Yeah.
But that's story back. It was just,
And before you were a judge, you were deputy sheriff?
well, lawyer.
Lawyer?
And, before that, I was a deputy sheriff here, and
That was his favorite job.
I bet.
that wasn't a bad job. So sheriff's office to the SWAT team and all that. So it was.
Well, you'll never let your kids ride their bikes to kindergarten, I'm sure.
No, now they get chauffeured.
You can't play in your front yard now.
That's true, that's
Yeah,
true.
I mean, really.
George, you want to tell us some history that you have here? You have some rich history in the Atlantic.
Well, I was thinking about what to put first, but I think I'll start with this. I was born in June of 45 in the same bed that Jim Morrison of the Doors was born, which is not where the motel is.
Pull your microphone up just a little bit.
I was born in 45, June 1945, at the Brevard Hospital, which is not where the sign says he was born. It was, that motel was the Motel.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the earliest memories I have of Indian Atlantic is my grandfather. We were at the groundbreaking of the original Presbyterian church, and there's a picture upstairs in the church. Janice Oliphant and Rodney Gratz and Tom and Brooke Waddell, whose father swore me in. He was a judge here, a circuit judge, and me.
I think you shut it off.
What?
You shut your mic off.
Green light.
I have visual problems, so, but the delivery nurse told me I could tell people that I was in the same bed, and I only had a 50% chance of being a liar because there were only 2 beds in the delivery in Melbourne, and that was, Morrison was born 18 months earlier. Probably turn that into a book by itself. But next thing I would say is my grandfather said, yeah, I remember when we cut center line for Fifth Avenue, I was working with old man Bogene. Well, old man Bogene was Ernest Cohen Hohen's son-in-law.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And,
They were early settlers.
and after that,
Dude.
and the Meehans, and they were around Kathy's husband and had a model shop in Hendrick's drugstore, which my grandmother remembered was the last place that sold Coca-Colas. But, so I remember the groundbreaking of the Presbyterian Church. I remember the stories my grandfather told me about this place in the teens, and he was from Ocala, out in a place called Geiger Landing, and Geiger Point on the Melbourne Causeway is named after him. And so he was a Ford dealer here, and as he put it, Henry Ford took away his dealership during the Depression. He owned at one point in time all 4 corners of A1A and Fifth Avenue. And then he sold them for a lot of money, which would probably be about $500 a corner, which is why I've had to work for a living all my life. There was Bruce and I. Bruce came here in '46, and so he's kind of a Johnny come lately. But he's older than I am, so I've had always on the dais, I'm behind Bruce, but Bruce is an excellent attorney and an excellent lawyer, and he has stories that make your blood run cold, trust me. Kurt is a phenomenal judge. On my left, he's pretty good too. And I've always enjoyed Jim. Of course, if you want to have stories about the West, his last name is Earp, and there is a connection. So for the purposes of ending this before 3 days go by, this place is near and dear to my heart. And the reason we didn't live over here was when my grandfather gave some land to my mother and father. My mother didn't want to live here because there were too many bugs over here. When I moved here, I learned that there aren't many bugs over here because the breeze blows them away. And so I've enjoyed my decades and decades in the Atlantic, and I can tell surf stories, but Sharon Catrice here, and she knows all those stories, and I promised her I won't tell them all. And then Jim's a good surfer. I know because I've seen him surfing while I was surfing with him, and he's, you know, tall, skinny guys, generally, that's a long ways down to the board, and it's not that easy. Lower center of gravity helps when you're surfing, and I was surprised at how good Jim is. The corner down here, the BBC, next, kind of in front of the lot behind it was Brownie's drugstore. Where the parking lot of CVS is was a 2-story building that had apartments upstairs and a hardware store downstairs with a, you know, kind of a geedunk. It had Coca-Colas and beer and stuff like that for sale. The one Murph story I would tell, other than hitchhiking Cocoa Beach and help him carry this boards down, because he taught me how to surf, was that he was a classical violinist, a tennis pro, a high diver. He and Dick used to do high diving at the, what was the hotel in Miami? Sharon? Okay. Right. But they would do high dives, and there's film of it, and fantastic high divers. And, 60, 80 feet up into a pool that was probably 14 feet deep. Just amazing stuff. And Murph and Dick both were incredibly good surfers, and they really developed the whole surfing community here. And it became one of the geographical nodes of the entire planet for surfing. Cocoa Beach, Indialantic, Sebastian Inlet before the addition to the end of it screwed up First Peak, was and is known throughout the world. And the major places are Southern California, Hawaii, South Africa, and it's spread constantly throughout my lifetime. There's a big surf community in Ireland now. So they were as much creators of this community and its culture as anybody that came along before them. Rudy Odsoff included, and Cohen Hohen. But the period of time that Bruce Sr. and I know, it was, and more positively, I would put Dick Catry, who really, really had an incredible impact on this community. And there were fantastic surfers. The first guy to be in a surf magazine was Henry Wallen, who a few years ago we had one of these here on surfing. And Henry was phenomenal. He passed away about a year ago. But periodically, despite whatever you read about global warming, we'll get huge storms off of Labrador and Newfoundland. And in November 30th, December 1st and 2nd, 1962, we had Hawaiian-sized waves stacked out as far as you can see from right here in Indialantic. We're a high-energy beach. That means we can take a Force 5 hurricane hitting directly on if it moves on and not breach the barrier island. The last crossover was down at Holland Golf Course where it broke through in 26 or 28. My granddad told me the story. I can't remember the exact year. And it actually broke through into the inlet, but there was nothing there but palmettos at the time. They have an adventitious root system that can go down 20 feet, and it's like a huge sponge. And the sand re-anchored there. That's not an inlet right there where the roads come together just south of Holland Park. That's probably enough.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, looking around this audience, I feel a little out of place because my introduction to Indialantic was in 1969.
Pull your mic up a little.
My mother and father divorced in Connecticut in 1969, and at the end of the school year, Ma loaded up my three brothers and I into our station wagon and drove down to Indialantic. And the reason why we were here is because Ma was a teacher, and she saw an article in Life magazine about B. Frank Brown and the advancements in the Melbourne education system. And I know my colleagues up here know a lot about that too. And so Ma just said, I want you guys to go to Melbourne High School. And so we came down here. Mom looked at property in Melbourne, and she looked at property out here, and she discovered having a house at the beach wasn't that much more expensive than having one in Melbourne in 1969. And so she bought our house that I live in today on 11th Avenue in Shannon. And we all came down here. And so I didn't know anything about the area. We were Yankees from Connecticut, and I didn't have any friends other than my brothers. And we eventually walked down to Shag's Surf Shop and bought a surfboard. And I remember talking to Dick Catry about it. I said, do you have like surf lessons? He goes, no, just take that out there and go do it. And it took us all dang summer to figure out how to stand up, but we finally did. It was a special place because since we didn't have all the history that you have and George and Bruce have, we were just kids running wild down here. The Trade Winds was still open, at least the bar was. I mean, Ma used to go over there once. It was right down the street. There was a time when the Trade Winds rented out, or they sold memberships in their swimming pool. So we had little ID tags one time, spent the summer swimming in the Trade Winds pool. One of my brother's friends, Billy Van Dusen, went and hid out in the Trade Winds empty lot for a while, and my brother used to take him food. It was just an amazing place to be. And when high school started, my twin and I went down to Mel High and started there. Just picked up friends along the way and had a great time. You know, you think about the difference between our oceanfront now and South Beach. Even in 1969, there was not much in South Melbourne Beach. You drive down, it was A1A and Palmettos. We mostly surfed right at the end of 11th Avenue because I didn't have to drive anywhere. I remember the breaks being much different. In the summers, there would be kids on surfboards from south of 11th to north of Watson. There'd be a lineup, hundreds of kids out there. And it's hard to imagine because it's not like that anymore. It's been years since the break really was any good. And I don't know if it was the renourishment or some of that stuff, but it was all we had to do. We had no internet, we had no cell phones, we didn't have any of that stuff. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because all of you predate me. But it was a great time to be a kid here. And we enjoyed it greatly.
And you used to drive your motorcycle on the beach?
Well, I remember there wasn't any signs that said no motorcycles on the beach.
Yeah.
And I envisioned myself as Steve McQueen. I had an old Triumph 500 and just had to ride it down the beach sometimes. And it was fun. I remember sitting on the beach right at the end of 11th with the young lady I was dating at the time. And John Burgoon came flying over in his dune buggy and landed 10 feet away from us. So, it was different. It was different. And I'll tell a story. The only time I ever had handcuffs on me was at the beach at 11th Avenue. I was down there lighting bottle rockets on the beach, and there was a beer involved too, and Indiana PD hooked me up, and my girlfriend said, "What are you doing? He just lives down the street. Let him go." So they did.
He was a good lawyer. But those were the days. You know, the police used to catch us in Central Florida, where I grew up, and at a party out in the woods where we all went to do that. And if we had beer, he just made us pour it all out. And if we didn't have a ride, he would take us home. And that's not where you want to be, believe me. Not my family. Whenever I was growing up, police car come or sheriff's car come and drop your daughter off. But thankfully, I never had. Are there any questions of the crowd that might?
I'm about to chime in on personal memories. Certainly, you have some. And I remember
have a
the
microphone
boardwalk
here,
was
too.
open at night, so it was a madhouse down there.
Use the microphone because we're recording this. And by the way, you'll be able to see this on YouTube later.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, boy.
Really?
Go Alden.
Glad I stopped.
Sorry about
Witness
that story
protection,
now.
you know?
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
I'm Jill Carroll Hoffman now, but I was Jill Carroll, and I graduated from Melbourne High School in 1961.
Ah.
And Bruce,
Yeah.
I remember you from high school. You probably don't remember me.
It was the best 3 years of my life, my senior year.
Oh,
Melbourne
yeah.
High School.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I
do-
agree.
It was 1961. You and
Well-
I are the same.
It was a good year. But my sister was Charlda Sizemore. She passed away a couple years ago, and my brother-in-law was Buddy Sizemore, who was a great athlete at Melbourne High School.
I knew Buddy real well.
Yeah, everybody remembers Buddy.
Yeah, he's a great
Charlda,
athlete. You're right.
he and Charlda got together in elementary school and were
Yeah.
total soulmates, but he passed away a few years before her.
I knew
But-
that.
Huh?
Yeah.
Did you know that? Well, what I wanted to ask you is, do you remember when we were on double sessions when they were building the
From O'Galley
middle
Junior
school.
High School.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was those were some of the worst days.
When we were freshmen.
Oh, I
right?
hated it. We got out so late. I was so tired.
Yeah.
And it seems like we got out of school at 5 o'clock or something like that.
We went in the afternoon, didn't we?
Yeah, we had to have the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
The morning would have been great, but we didn't get the morning. We got the afternoon. I hated that.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah. Good
Not to
Lord.
bring up a bad thing, but
Yeah.
I wondered if you remembered. And it's nice to
Oh,
see.
yeah, I do. My was a school board guy. And,
Yeah.
the space race started, there were no schools. There were 3 high schools, Melbourne, Cocoa, and Titusville. So they had to build schools. I mean, it was crazy.
I bet.
Yeah.
They built Hoover, they built O'Galley Junior High, Satellite. I mean, that was all, they had no money, really. I mean,
Lots
they
of
did
kids.
it. They were doers. I got to say, that bunch, that generation, the Joe
Absolutely.
Wickhams, my dad, all those people, they got stuff done. I mean, nowadays it's a little bit different, that's for sure.
I probably remember your dad too. My dad was Dr. Charles Carroll. He was a scientist, mathematician, and so he was also involved in some of those. He was pretty good friends with B. Frank Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And
my
all
dad
that.
hired B. Frank, believe it or not.
You did?
The guy that hired him, yeah. And
Oh,
he
wow.
was a great, it was a good time for all of us. Went to Mama.
Yeah,
He was a
everybody
character.
knew him.
When I went to college and after I graduated, I took education because I was a teacher and an assistant principal for a long time.
Yeah.
And B. Frank was in my books. His name was in my textbooks, and I went, oh, I knew him. He was my
He was a
principal.
great educator, I mean, he was.
He got a lot of publicity, that's for sure.
Jill, I have to interject. I was classmates with your sister
I know.
and Buddy, and I remember when they were first dating, and it was what became O'Galley Junior High School. And we actually went, our double sessions, we were in the old primary building on New Haven, which got torn down to make the second Trinity Tower.
Did you go, when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, we went to where O'Galley High School, where Melbourne High School is, it was just classrooms, there's nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
They
right.
used to bus us into Henniger to eat lunch.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it was-
I remember that.
It was a dirt road that ended at the school, really. It was Mel High. Then, the first class that graduated was 56. That was my sister, but from there. I've known George my whole life, actually.
Oh, yeah, I remember George, and
Yeah,
we
everybody
went to
remembers
East.
George.
Don't tell.
Yeah, he was famous. My mother and father, and George's mother and father, they were all social friends in those days. Everybody was your mother. His mother
yeah.
was my mother, the Garens, the Dares,
Yeah.
the
Oh, I knew all them.
Maxwells. Yeah, they were all,
Yeah, my dad was on county staff, and
George
building
couldn't
those
do anything
schools,
without somebody catching him.
they always caught me. But my dad was on staff, and he built W.J. Creel, Sable. He'd be principal of 2 schools at once. And he and B. Frank were friends, so I knew. And B.J. was his daughter, and she was classmates.
Yeah,
She's
I walked
brilliant.
home from school with her every day after. She lived on Michigan. The Browns lived on Michigan right down
They
from
did,
us.
yeah.
And we lived on Michigan. Yeah.
A lot of influence, and back in those days, you were just as afraid of somebody else's parent as you were
Absolutely.
your own, because they didn't have any problem with
Yeah,
swatting you on the butt.
that's,
You would have to have been conscious to know that everybody knew you and to be good.
Yes.
And fortunately, I wasn't.
You were a character. I remember you.
yeah, I know.
You turned out just fine, George.
You turned out better than
Well,
I thought you would.
that's
Listen, when somebody asks me how I'm doing, I say, much better than my mother expected.
Yeah.
His teachers showed up, from grade school on to say if it was really him. Is that true, Georgie?
Greg Maxwell from Browning Maxwell Funeral Home's my first cousin. And
is it really-
whenever I get in trouble, I tell him I was Greg.
Yeah. His grandparents.
He's
were
forgiven
kind of
me, but-
famous people too, really. Your grandpa.
Guy Geiger, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came here sometime before World War I. Then he went off to World War I. He was a sergeant major in a machine gun
Did
battalion.
he live in the Keys?
He what?
Did your grandfather live in the Keys?
No, that was Uncle John Geiger, who was the captain.
The Geiger tree is named after, you know, your family.
And the Audubon House in Key West is John Geiger's house.
Oh, wow.
But,
Wow.
but again, and you know, the Keys people were all wreckers. Wreckers were people who go stand out on the reef and wave lanterns so the ships would come ashore and wreck.
Then they can get the booty off of it, huh?
Yeah. I noticed when you said outlaws and in-laws, well, they were mostly outlaws that started this state. And after the Treaty of Paris in 1783, it took a few months to get the word back here, but a lot of people came south to, probably Tories for the most part, but a lot of outlaws and everything. And the Indians didn't even really make the Seminoles didn't really make their in-migration until the early 1800s, 1800s. There were some, but this state was pretty much started by, in that year of the Treaty of Paris and really the years that followed, the King of Spain, who inherited Florida back from the British, who had administered it up until the Revolutionary War, thought he could redo what the English king had done and open it up for farming because they knew there was no gold here. And so he invited all those South Carolina and Georgia farmers to come down here and settle. And that's how my family got here on my mom's side.
Yeah, she was a Geiger.
And they were, well, Granddad put it this way: if you can trace your family 3 generations, you'll find out that you're related to princes.
I believe that.
George's parents were married by a famous Episcopal minister from Gainesville, Florida.
Presbyterian.
Huh?
Presbyterian.
Presbyterian. His name was Preacher Gordon, and I mean he was famous, and he kind of was a founder of my fraternity. So I mean, so he would come to the fraternity house when I was in college, the Preacher Gordon, and but anyway, his parents. Tell a story what Preacher Gordon told your dad.
Oh, God. My dad was a Navy pilot. He was actually flying against German submarines, and my mom, who worked in the crypto room, could see the ships burning at sea at night. And this would be in the winter of 42, because we got in a war December 7th of 41. And so he was flying single-engine float planes from here to Opelika to Nassau, back to Jacksonville, and down back to Banana River, which is now Patrick. And so Mom worked in crypto, and she was a graduate of Florida State College of Women, all right? And that's another day story. But they knew each other, but Dad went off to multi-engine school in Vermont, where he stayed in his fraternity house. By the way, Bruce and I are fraternity brothers, same fraternity, different chapters. I'm Stetson, he's Florida. And so we know Preacher Gordon. Well, Preacher Gordon was a great hunter. Wanda Van Lingen's uncle used to hunt with him. And so he was a great hunter, and he was a man of the people, but he was very elegant. And he had baptized me, but the wedding story goes this way. And he told it to me, Dr. Gordon did, that in the preacher's room back of the organ, and I can see this old church because it was still there when I was a kid, behind the organ well, there was a preacher's room and a vestry or something like that, and Dad was in there waiting to go out on the wedding, and at that time, the train went down University Boulevard. And it was the main street in Gainesville, 441 north and south and University. And he said, now, son, you know you're going to get married. This is a lifetime commitment. And he says, and he opens the door, and there's the steam engine right there with the train heading back to Jacksonville. And he says, you got a choice. You can go in there and marry this young woman. They went on their first date a week before. Then I tell you something about the temperature at the time. But anyway, so he said, now, you go on back in there and everything. If you get on that train and just head on out of town, no problem. I'll just go in and make your apologies. Dad went back in. And where the Melbourne Hotel is, which is now the 1900 building, used to have a Moorish dome on top, and one floor down or 2 floors down was the bridal suite, and that's where my parents spent their honeymoon for a week, I think, and the bill was like $20, I want to say, or something like that. I've got the bill. Jackson Blind gave it to me. Somehow he had the records of the old hotel. Don't ask me any more questions, and I'll let everybody else talk.
Kurt, did you know all this stuff was going on all the time?
Not at all.
Preacher Gordon would come over and have dinner sometimes at the fraternity house. And, I mean, he was a wonderful man. I mean, really, wrote a lot of books. He wrote a book about our fraternity, actually. But so it was Valentine's Day. We had date night, and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, we ended up with a head table with the house mother, and Preacher Gordon came to dinner with us, you know, so we're all there, you know. And I had bought her a gift, which was inappropriate, actually, for Valentine's Day. So Preacher Gordon sees it and says, you know, why don't you open your gift? I'm going, oh, my God, you know. We can't do this, you know. But, you know, very embarrassing, I tell you the truth.
There's a book that, if you can find it, I'm sure it's not in print anymore. It's called A Mischievous. But to rotate this back to Indialantic, this state was around 1 million people then, at most. And I remember one of my older relatives, my dad was from Colorado, and his mother had actually been born in Manhattan. They left when she was 3 and went west, where most of the family was already out in Colorado. So my dad was a Westerner, which is why he was the head of the desegregation thing. He worked with all the black principals. And we had no violence in this county when we desegregated. And of course, we're kind of a different creature than most of the country anyway. But so I forgot where I was going with this. Probably.
You're with good company.
You know, another aside, Jack Murph, the Surf Murphy,
Yeah.
you know, the Whiskey Creek murders, he
Yes.
killed those 2 women, you know, down in Miami. They actually tried that case in Pensacola.
Oh,
They
really?
changed the venue, and my mother-in-law was on the jury.
Oh, my gosh.
Well,
They convicted.
which brings me back to the point I forgot, which is the small town nature of this state. My aunt, who was probably no blood relation at all, Aunt Shug, was Spencer Holland's secretary for 24 years and Childs's for 6. And when I was a child, we would go up to D.C., not commonly, and in those days, we drove, but the train still ran from Melbourne to Washington, D.C. And you could go down there, and my grandmother had done it many times when she was younger, and when there was money in the community, because there was no money in the community from about 26 on, because the land bust happened well before the Depression hit the United States. But she got upset one time because they wouldn't let the lady that helped her around the house ride in the same compartment as her. And she gave them a dressing down, and they let her ride all the way to D.C. But that would be the chapter on race relations in the South
yeah.
that aren't exactly what's been taught the last 75 years.
No.
But they, you know, I'm sure a lot of the bad stuff really happened, and but you don't get you get sort of a skewed view of the world. I alluded to the fact my dad was involved with the desegregation. He was a Westerner. So instead of putting a Southerner in working with the black principals, they put a Westerner, probably because of the optics of it. And I don't know that that's a bad thing, because to this day, Dick Blake comes up and puts his arm around me and hugs me and says, "How you doing?" A day doesn't go by and I don't think about your father,
Aw,
you know, so.
what a nice thing.
And Dick Blake was one of the black principals, and his son, Mike, is the former mayor of Cocoa.
Yep, yep.
Still is.
Yeah, so, in fact, a lot of our Melbourne history started with the black community. It wasn't a huge white community back in those days. And, I read a story recently about the Stone family and their long, long history in their business. I mean, Tucker's. Jim loves Tucker. Oh, my gosh, you can't wait to have to go over there and say hello to that man.
Yeah.
He's there every day. But, we need to have a story about that one day.
The Goods were one of the first white families. The Bojines and the Goods were the first
Yeah,
Goods,
white settlers.
yeah.
the Goods.
There's so much. Does anyone else have a question for?
Probably
Yeah,
not.
yeah, okay.
I can't.
Anyone awake back there? No, really?
They're having fun. Are you kidding me?
Know anything about Second Avenue? When I moved there 32 years ago, my neighbor across the street told me a story about a stream that went from the ocean to the river through Second Avenue, and that there were alligators in the stream. Do you guys know anything about that?
Well, no, but we have a friend who's a lawyer here, and we were having breakfast with him one day, he and his sister, and they told us there was a pond at the end of 8th Avenue, and they used to swim in that pond all the time. And, when you see in some of the lawns around our neighborhoods, they have that dollarweed growing in them, and that used to grow around ponds. And so I wonder if there weren't more of those kind of things. It was full of those things. I mean, they wonder why they live in swamps in some of those places over there in Deltona. It was all swamp. They just filled in. Yeah, yeah. It makes a difference. Well, it was always a joke that you go buy land in Florida when there's been a big, huge storm. Otherwise, you might come back to your land and it'll be underwater, and you can't build a house there. So there was something to that.
First time my grandfather actually came here, he came on a steamboat, a flat-bottom steamboat, because you couldn't really the roads at certain times in here.
Yeah.
And as a child, we could not get from here to Kissimmee during high water times because you go out before Dead Man's Curve, when you were out to the fish camp.
Never hit an alligator going to Orlando.
I almost did one day.
Yeah, it was on the.
And the water
was on
would
the road.
flow down in the ditches, it would
Oh, yeah.
flow. You could,
right.
there was a lot of water
192.
present.
One
Yes,
of,
ma'am?
When I was young, we used to play with the alligators, baby alligators.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
You hold their mouth closed, and then you rub
Yeah,
them
they don't have
on the
any
stomach,
yeah,
and they
power.
go to sleep.
Yeah, yeah.
And we used to do that as a child in Indialantic on Michigan
Oh,
Avenue.
yeah. I lived out in the woods, so we played with things people today would just go, what? I mean, that was our playground.
child safety was, don't put your arm down turtle hole
Yeah.
because there might be a
Rattlesnakes.
rattlesnake in there.
Yeah. rattlesnakes.
And
Used to throw a
and
stick
Cub
down.
Scouts off of Melbourne Avenue at Jimmy Taylor's family's home, Teddy Kaminsky used to take the oar on the rowboat that was down by Crane Creek and would go out there, and I wasn't allowed to go, but I went anyway sometimes. And he would take the oar and hit the gators on the head.
Yeah, they were all over there and there.
Yeah.
This is 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds in Crane Creek, and you could count the gators from the back dock. I mean,
Yeah, we used to call them out if we saw them. Well, I want to thank you all for coming today, and all of you too. And if you have anything to share with us, you can always call any of the members of the Heritage Committee.
About our website.
Oh, yeah, if you go to the Heritage Committee, what's it called? I'm not even positive. Isn't that terrible? I should know.
The town website.
If you want to
Yeah.
know something.com.
Yeah, right. Google it.
And for years, Sue Glass, a retiring town councilman, maintained the Indialantic Heritage.
That's right.
Website, and on the website there, which you can now access through the town website, there are wonderful videos that Sue Silver Telly Award that you see there came from a project that we did years ago that it's called Indialantic Portrait of a Community. You can buy a copy of the DVD at Town Hall when it's open, but it is available to stream. And it's wonderful interviews with people who, many of whom have already left us, and really interesting and fun to see, yeah. And Murph the Surf was best known, he was an internationally known surfer, but he became world famous for breaking into the Museum of Natural History and stealing the Star of India sapphire, which
Along
was
with others.
bigger than a golf ball.
That was the only one they didn't get back,
sapphire.
was that one. They think they cut it up into smaller
Yeah, he stole
diamonds.
a bunch of things. They never got that one back.
Yeah.
And he, subsequently, as Bruce said, you know, was a convicted murderer and was to spend his lifetime in prison, and sincerely found Jesus in prison and devoted the rest of his life to ministry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the
Died in
Tradewinds Hotel,
River.
it's interesting that FIT bought it at one point. No longer a hotel, but it was a hotel, you know, well into the early 70s, and FIT bought it, and they had kids staying there, and there was thought that Indialantic might buy it, but the problem was that the rebar was rusting, and that's because the cement was mixed with water that had too much salt in it, so there was just no way to save it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'd like for you all to stay for a few minutes, ask some more questions, look at our boards, and have some treats from, I think, well, we tried to get something that's kind of like what we'd be eating in those days, you know, munchies?
Yeah.
Munchies?
For setting this up, too.
Yeah,
You're welcome. Thank you.
thank you, Cindy.
Oh, yeah.
She knows the real
We need to do an interview of just Shag.
You know all the
Thank you.
stuff, Shag.
That's
My name
right.
is Shag Katrie, and I
mother-in-law
was
loved
Shag
you.
Surf and Sport. We got here in 1966, and I sold the store in 2000. So we were 35 years on the corner. So, yeah, George and I
Which
do have
store?
a few stories.
Shag, surf shop.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's where I bought my surf.
That's where you bought your
bought it
surfboard.
from Shag.
So Dick,
Any Christmas treats for
yeah.
shirts for everybody.
Well, we had a great time. We feel like we were part of the community for a very long time. Just the beginning, when you mentioned Rudy Odzoff,
Yeah.
Rudy
the mayor,
sold
wasn't he,
us, or
sometime?
came to me, we rented from Rudy.
Yeah.
And that building, I believe the town hall was in the building where Bizarro's is. Then there was a medical building in, but Murph was there prior to all of that.
Yeah.
Then we came in. So when we rented for a while, and then Rudy came up to us because he took a liking to us, and he said, okay, this is how you're going to buy the building. So we bought the building. It was called contract for deed, which people didn't really do anymore, but we paid him rent for a while until we got a deposit, which then went into a contract. So we were able to buy the two buildings. So the Bizarro's building is where we started, and then we moved to the corner when we opened this with a fruit tree bar. So then Rudy sold us his last lot, which is on Palm in Miami, and that's where we built our home. So Rudy was very much in our lives early on. So I'll say one more thing about Murph, and then I'm happy to answer questions. It'll help me remember. But I'll be happy to do that. But Murph died a few years ago.
Yeah.
And they had a paddle out for him last month up in Cocoa Beach. They didn't have it for a while. And when he came out of the prison system, he came out through the Billy Graham ministry program. And that's how he was able to come out. Yeah, yeah. So.
Wow.
You know, the police department in those years was quite notorious, too. You know, we had Phil Williams, Vinnie Torpy, Cruz Camp, and almost all of them became lawyers. You know, Vinnie became a judge, Phil became the sheriff. I mean, and they were like crazy. I I mean, they were
Yeah,
crazy.
Willow.
Yeah. You know, Williams tells the story that he was, you know, on patrol at night. And when he came in, you know, he kind of signed off on a card that he checked everything and put it in the box. You know, the box was screwed to the wall so you couldn't get it out. It had those kind of screws you can't, you know, only go one way. So Vinny's back on patrol, so he goes by the Indian Atlantic Shopping Center. He said, "Did you?" He said, "Well, not really," but he said, "Well, there's a frickin' hole in the hardware store's back thing that people can go through." And he said, "Oh my God," he said, "the place has been robbed." You know, so then they came back and they tried to get the thing off the wall, which they did. Get Phil's card out that he checked all this stuff. I mean, good Lord, the jewelry store always had the alarm go off, you know, so it would off all the time and there'd never be anybody in there. So Roger Skinner goes in and opens the door and says, "Is anybody here?" And this guy starts shooting at him. Missed him, you know, he shot back and missed the guy too, and the guy escaped. I mean,
Oh, my.
those guys were crazy. They all became lawyers. It's amazing. Well, Curdy was one too. He became a lawyer. Yeah. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Phil.
Huh? He worked for Phil.
Went to work for Phil.
Phil changed his life. You did. Yeah.
You had mentioned what Dick had quoted about
Yeah.
the Atlantic and the heritage with surfing. So now you have a gold medal winner of Carolyn Marks. You've got two little towns that are one square mile each.
Yeah.
So it's really a big community.
Yeah.
And it's the first pro that we had was Gary Proper. And it started early on with the Gary Proper nose rider that was 9 foot 6
Yeah, he
inches
was-
long, which
yeah.
changed. The evolution of surfing was something. And then we had Kelly Slater,
Yeah.
who was on our surf team when he was 8 years old with his brother Sean.
The goods, the kids that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we had that little surf team because Dick got tired of the big surfers because they wanted too much, so we went to the kids.
and Crawford, who used to jump off the pier and get in trouble down at Sebastian Inlet all the time.
So you've got quite a surfing heritage here that
Oh,
I
yeah.
understand
It
you
was
you have a
literally all we
committee
did.
that might be doing something with the boardwalk?
That was one, well, I don't know. One of my favorite events we had here was the day that we had all the surfer guys.
We did tell them about the surfing program that we did, and it
Yeah.
was standing room only.
Yeah, oh, yeah, and it was
I didn't know
really,
that.
well, you know what was really interesting about that surfing group is that they all knew each other and they all supported each other. And they were all, I called them Renaissance men. They all knew that they wanted to surf, and that was really the primary thing for everything else they did, but they all were successful at other ventures, whether it would be the surf shop or, you know, some other venture to earn money. They knew how to make themselves viable, and they were good at what they did. And it was really an interesting day. It was my favorite event that we've held.
Up until today.
Up until today with my judge friends, yeah. But, you know, for a small town like Indy Atlantic, we do have a large variety of very interesting people. I was surprised today, this is probably the first panel we've ever had where not one of them came to Indy Atlantic because of that Kennedy Space Center or the defense contractors, because that's generally what I hear is, you know, my dad got a job at the Space Center or with a defense contractor, because that was a real reason why, for many reasons, the whole area grew so quickly.
Oh, yeah.
You know, was those industries and bringing those people in, all of the schools that had to be built, you know, all of the infrastructure that had to be built. I think, you know, we still owe a great debt, which reminds me, at 4:37 today, there's a rocket going up, so.
Yeah, like every day.
Enjoy, yeah, I know. Isn't that the truth? So we still are very influenced by all of that. And, you know, that's not a bad thing. We have a great community here, so go out and enjoy that moon tonight if it's still up and watch that rocket go off. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Now it's time to eat, Bruce.
Yeah.
I'm going to name, this is the Jacobus Buffet.
I'm beyond that.